A school bus driver had noticed a young girl crying quietly on the bus every afternoon. As the days passed, the girl's behavior became more and more disturbing. One day, after dropping off the students, he decided to investigate and looked under the girl's seat. He was shocked by what he found. Wait, watch this video till the end, because something truly shocking happens to Amina and a terrifying secret gets revealed that you don't want to miss. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Jabo Mokena, as usual, reached out and adjusted the rearview mirror. The school bus rumbled through the quiet streets of Kibera. Jabo was 62 years old. He had worked for decades as a mechanic, and after retiring, he found a new purpose: driving a school bus. After 35 years of repairing engines and gearboxes, transporting children to school had given his life a new kind of meaning and order. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows on the blue seats. Jabo glanced at his watch. 3:45 p.m. Exactly the time to drop the kids off at home. The students, full of energy, chatted about the weekend, exams, and the latest gossip from social media. The bus was filled with teenage noise. But when Jabo looked again in the mirror, his eyes fixed on one girl sitting alone in the third row. She was by the air vent, her brown hair falling across her face. Her shoulders slumped, and though she tried to hide it, her hand kept brushing her eyes. Quietly, without anyone noticing, she was crying. For 3 days in a row, Jabo had seen her like this, always in the same seat, always silent, always crying quietly. The emptier the bus got, the clearer her tears became. Jabo's years of experience told him, this girl has a problem. He glanced at the student list and confirmed his suspicion. Her name was Amina Ndiaye, Class 9B. She had only been at the school for 2 weeks. In the first week, her silence seemed normal. New students were often shy. But now, things were different. Day by day, her condition seemed to be getting worse. The bus stopped one by one at different stations, and the kids got off. The noise faded, but Amina's tears became more visible. At one point, Jabo saw her lean forward, reaching under the seat. A strange metallic sound came from below. The driver called out, "Is everything okay back there?" The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes widened with fear. She whispered, barely audible, "Yes, sorry, I just dropped my tissue." Jabo said nothing, but his heart remained unsettled. The day before, he had tried to start a conversation with her. "How's school? Have you made any friends yet?" But the girl only gave short answers and quickly went back into silence. When the last stop came, the bus was nearly empty. Only Amina remained. Her home was at the end of Lumumba Street, a small building painted pale blue. Jabo pulled the brake, opened the door, and said, "Last stop." Amina picked up her pink backpack. Her eyes were swollen, dark circles beneath them. She softly said, "Goodbye," and started to leave. But this time, unlike usual, Jabo also stepped off the bus. The girl froze. Fear crept into her voice. "Why are you following me?" Jabo raised his hands to calm her. I've just noticed you've been sad these past few days. I wanted to make sure everything's all right." For a second, terror flashed across her face, but she quickly pulled herself together. "It's nothing serious. School is hard, and I miss my old friends a lot." Jabo's instincts told him there was more behind that answer, but he didn't push further. He only said, "All right, just remember, sometimes talking about it helps more than you think." Just then, the door of the house opened. A middle-aged man with a cold, emotionless face appeared. "Amina," he called harshly, "come inside." Before leaving, the girl gave Jabo a brief, pleading glance. The man introduced himself. "I'm Musa Okafor, Amina's stepfather." Jabo respectfully replied, "I'm just her bus driver. She's been looking very sad these past days, so I thought I should mention it." The man shrugged. "Her grandmother passed away. They were very close. It'll take time." Jabo offered his condolences, but when the man shut the door with that same coldness, Jabo's heart did not rest. Something wasn't right. The bus returned to the garage. As always, Jabo began his daily routine, collecting the items students had left behind: crumpled papers, empty water bottles, snack bags, until he reached the third row. Amina's seat. His eyes caught the air vent beneath the chair, the same spot he had heard that metallic sound from the day before. He bent down, turned on his phone's flashlight, and looked closer. There was a narrow gap between the seat's base and the vent. He reached in with his hand. His fingertips brushed against something plastic. With effort, he pulled it out. A small transparent packet. When he raised it up, his breath caught. Inside was a half-used strip of pills, pink-coated tablets. He carefully read the label on the back. The drug's name and dosage were clear. Right there, in the silence of the garage, his heartbeat quickened. He quickly searched the name on his phone. The result appeared on the screen. Birth control pills. Jabo collapsed into the driver's seat, his head spinning. A girl, just 14 or 15, crying every day, hiding birth control pills under the bus seat. He snapped a photo of the package, noted the exact place where he had found it, then slipped the pills into his bag. The weight of responsibility fell heavy on his shoulders. He whispered to himself, "I can't ignore this." The first thing he did was text the school principal, Ibrahim Diop. He sent the photos and wrote, "Today I found this under one of the seats. It seems to belong to one of the students. Please advise how we should proceed." Minutes passed. No reply. Worried, Jabo called directly. The principal's cold, disinterested voice answered, "I'm in a meeting right now. Is this urgent?" "I believe it is. Very urgent. I sent you the photo." "I'll look at it after the meeting. Doesn't sound like anything too serious, right?" Jabo held his breath, wanting to explain more, but before he could, the principal hung up. The driver muttered under his breath, "Then I'll have to do something myself." After finishing the bus route, Jabo drove home in his own car, but his path took him once again past Amina's pale blue house on Lumumba Street. His heart wouldn't rest. He slowed down, then circled the block and stopped right in front of the house. He knocked on the door. No answer. Inside, everything looked dark. Strange. I dropped her off here barely an hour ago. He checked the school's emergency contact list. The guardian's number was listed under Musa Okafor. He called again and again. No one answered. Uneasy, Jabo continued driving. But just a few streets later, he suddenly spotted a familiar face. Amina. She was walking out of a pharmacy, alone, pale, one hand pressed against her stomach. She was struggling to walk. Jabo immediately pulled over. Amina, are you all right? The girl lifted her head. Fear and exhaustion swirled in her eyes. She whispered, I'm fine. But her body told another story. Jabo stepped closer. Is your stepfather with you? Quickly, she replied. That's none of your business. Please, leave me alone. Before Jabo could say more, a couple passing by stopped. The woman asked, Is everything okay here? With a trembling voice, almost in the woman's ear, Amina said, This man scares me. The couple immediately stepped between them. The man frowned and said firmly, You'd better leave, sir, or we'll call the police. Flushed with shame and helplessness, Jabo backed away and returned to his car. In the rearview mirror, he saw Amina once again left on her own, just as she bent over and vomited beside a trash can. Jabo whispered to himself, There's a serious problem here. Jabo decided to keep an eye on Amina from a distance. Not long after, he saw her step into a small corner shop. It looked like a grocery, maybe even a liquor store. A few minutes later, she came out. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her was Musa Okafor. He locked up the shop door, keys jangling, revealing himself as either the owner or an employee there. Musa handed something to Amina, a drink. From where Jabo stood, it wasn't clear whether it was juice or something else. The girl accepted it reluctantly, her head down, shoulders heavy. Moments later, Musa started the car. Amina sat in the passenger seat, still silent, still lifeless. Jabo's instincts screamed inside him. He didn't even think. He turned the ignition, pulled onto the road, and began following them at a careful distance. I have to make sure this girl is safe, he muttered to himself. Keeping a safe distance, Jabo trailed Musa's vehicle. The city blocks slowly faded, giving way to emptier roads at the edge of town. Every few minutes, Jabo glanced at his phone, hoping Principal Ibrahim Diop had replied. But there was still nothing. Desperate, he remembered Fatima Adebayo, the teacher he had briefly met during the school's orientation event. He called her immediately, his voice tense as he explained the situation. Fatima confirmed what Jabo feared. Amina was always withdrawn, often absent from class, and once she had even fallen asleep during a theatre rehearsal. The teacher admitted, I've reported my concerns before, but the principal didn't take it seriously. When Jabo forwarded her the photo of the pills, Fatima gasped. This is very troubling. Her family must be informed immediately. But right then, Jabo's eyes widened. The car ahead suddenly veered off the main road, turning into a large park on the outskirts of the city. He whispered into the phone, They're heading out of town, into a quiet park. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon. The park was quiet, with only a few scattered families sitting on the grass. Musa parked his car in the lot. Jabo pulled in a few rows behind, trying to remain unnoticed. Musa stepped out carrying a cooler bag. Amina followed, her head bowed, her steps heavy. On the grass, Musa spread a blanket. He opened a drink for himself and handed another packet drink to Amina. From a distance, it could have looked like a simple picnic, but Jabo saw what others could not. Amina curled at the edge of the blanket, refusing to touch her drink. Musa talking, sometimes placing his hand on her shoulder, and each time Amina recoiled. For a moment, Jabo saw Musa's face twist with anger, but quickly the man forced a laugh to cover it. Jabo muttered under his breath, "No, this is not normal." Minutes later, 3 unknown men approached. They looked ordinary, but their body language was rough, intimidating. They greeted Musa with handshakes and laughter, as if they were old friends. Then Musa motioned to Amina, gesturing for her to stand. Together, the group started walking toward an old building at the far end of the park, abandoned, run down, almost like a warehouse. A chill ran down Jabo's spine. 4 grown men and 1 teenage girl inside that place. This can't be right. He pulled out his phone and dialed 112. "I'd like to report something suspicious. A teenage girl is being taken by 4 men into an abandoned building inside Mapito Park. I believe she's in serious danger." The operator assured him that units were on their way. They told him, "Please, keep watch from a safe distance." Jabo hid behind a tree, peering through a dirty window. What he saw inside froze his blood. Amina, pressed against the wall, crying. The men surrounding her, closing in. He could hear Musa's harsh whisper, "You'll do as we say. Otherwise, you know what will happen." Jabo crouched by the filthy window, hands trembling. Inside, Musa moved closer to Amina, his voice low and threatening. "If you don't help us, you know what will happen. Your mother won't even remember you after her new baby arrives." Amina's eyes filled with tears. "Please, don't." Jabo's blood ran cold. He quickly relayed everything to the emergency operator. The answer came, "Police will arrive in 3 minutes. Please do not intervene yourself." But suddenly, a firm hand landed on Jabo's shoulder. He turned sharply. 2 joggers, athletic young men, stood there, concern written on their faces. After Jabo explained the situation, they peered through the window. Their expressions hardened instantly. "We can't just wait here," one whispered. Before they could act further, noise inside the building shifted. The men seemed to sense something outside. Silence fell. Then the joggers rushed forward, pounding on the door, shouting, "Open the door!" For a second, nothing. Then a weak, desperate cry from within. "Help me, please!" Just at that moment, sirens pierced the air. 2 police cars sped into Mapito Park, lights flashing. Officers leapt out, guns drawn, storming toward the building. One shouted, "Everyone inside! Hands up! Come out immediately!" 3 of the men gave up at once, raising their hands in surrender. But Musa still stood close to Amina, gripping her tightly. The police aimed their weapons. "Step away from the girl." Musa scowled, his hand twitching toward a bottle. "This is just a misunderstanding," he yelled. "Drop the bottle, hands in the air," the officers ordered. For tense seconds, the air was thick with danger. Then Musa cursed, hurled the bottle aside, and slowly raised his hands. The officers moved swiftly, forcing him to the ground and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. The other men were pinned down as well, but as they dragged Musa away, his furious eyes locked on Jabbo. He lunged suddenly, trying to break free. The officers wrestled him back down, restraining him harder. Jabbo stepped back, heart hammering, sweat cold on his brow. Meanwhile, in the corner of the warehouse, Amina crouched, hugging herself, tears streaming. A female officer approached gently, draping a blanket over her shoulders. She whispered softly, "You're safe now, sweetheart. It's over. No one will hurt you again." Within minutes, Mapeto Park had transformed into a crime scene. Police cars, ambulances, emergency workers, yellow tape stretched around the old warehouse. Jabbo, along with the two joggers, gave his statement to the officers. Meanwhile, Amina was carefully escorted into an ambulance, shivering beneath a blanket, her face pale and streaked with tears. A female social worker sat beside her, speaking gently, trying to calm her. From a distance, Jabbo watched, his chest tight with emotion. Then the social worker raised her hand and called to him. "She wants to see you." Jabbo walked slowly toward the ambulance. Amina looked up at him, her voice hoarse, weak. "Thank you. If you hadn't been there." Jabbo knelt down, meeting her eyes. "What matters is that you're safe now." Right then, he handed the police and the social worker the packet of pills he had found earlier. The moment Amina saw them, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The social worker touched her shoulder gently. "Don't worry, none of this is your fault." Hours later, in the Nairobi National Hospital, a doctor entered the small examination room. Her name was Dr. Nancy Nkoma. She glanced at the test results, then looked up at the gathered family and Jabbo. Her voice was calm but heavy. "The tests confirm it. Amina is pregnant, still in the early weeks." The room froze. Jabbo felt his breath leave his body. At that moment, Amina's mother, Leila Ndiaye, rushed in, tears streaming. She embraced her daughter desperately. "Oh God, my child, what happened to you?" Behind her came the grandmother, Yaya, her face a storm of fury and shock. "Where is Musa? Where is that monster?" she screamed. The doctor raised a hand gently. "For now, the most important thing is Amina's health." When the words sank in, that her daughter, just 14, was pregnant, Leila almost collapsed. Sobbing, she kept repeating, "No, she's only a child. How is this possible?" Amina broke down in sobs. "Mama, I didn't want this. I was so scared." Her mother gripped her hand tightly, shaking her head. The social worker sat gently at Amina's bedside. Her voice was soft but firm. "Amina, you need to tell us the truth. No one will blame you. We just need to know what happened." Amina trembled, tears streaming down her face. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "For a month, he's been coming into my room at night. He told me if I ever said anything, especially to Mama, he would kill me. And the baby too. I was so scared. That's why I never told anyone." Her mother, Leila, gasped in horror, covering her mouth with her hand. God!" The social worker touched Amina's shoulder with reassurance. "This is not your fault. Every bit of it is his crime." Jabo stood silently in the corner, his fists clenched, his chest heavy with grief and rage. Jabo finally asked, "Amina, why did you have those pills under the bus seat?" Her voice shook. "In the mornings I was always sick. One of the girls at school told me maybe I was pregnant. She said those pills could stop it. So I used my pocket money to buy them and hid them under the seat." Dr. Nancy in coma sighed deeply. "Those pills only work before pregnancy, not after." Amina's eyes widened in shock. "I didn't know. I thought they could stop it." Layla pulled her daughter into her arms, tears flowing. "No, sweetheart, none of this is your fault." The grandmother, Yaya, spoke with a stern voice. "She's only 14. She cannot raise a baby. We must consider ending the pregnancy." Dr. Nancy in coma nodded gravely. At this age, pregnancy is extremely dangerous, and under the law, in cases like this, termination is allowed, but the final decision belongs to the family. The room fell into a heavy silence. Layla, the mother, sat holding her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. The social worker looked from one person to another, waiting. Everyone's eyes finally turned toward Amina. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm just afraid Mama won't love me anymore." Jabo leaned forward gently, his voice warm and steady. "Child, a mother's love never runs out. A new baby cannot take away her love for you. It only multiplies, like a flame lighting another flame. The light only grows." Amina's eyes welled with tears again, but this time a small smile broke through her pain. "Do you really believe that?" Jabo nodded firmly. "I'm certain of it." Hours later, in the hospital hallway, a sudden cry broke the silence. Amina's mother, Layla, doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her face twisted in pain as she gasped, "I think the baby is coming." Nurses rushed over instantly, lowering her into a wheelchair. They hurried her down the corridor towards the maternity ward. Amina's grandmother, Yaya, and Jabo stood frozen in shock. Before disappearing through the double doors, Layla turned her head, struggling to speak. "Please, don't leave Amina alone until I return." Jabo placed his hand firmly on his chest. "I promise." Jabo entered Amina's room again. The girl's eyes were swollen with tears as she asked softly, "Will Mama be all right?" Jabo gave her a reassuring smile. "Yes, child. She's stronger than you think. The doctors are with her now." Amina sighed, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. "Mama was so upset. She said she doesn't want me to carry this heavy burden for the rest of my life." The silence between them was heavy. Then Amina whispered, her voice fragile, "Sometimes I think when the new baby comes, she won't love me as much anymore." Jabo leaned closer, speaking softly but firmly. "No, Amina, a mother's love is like a candle. When it lights another candle, the flame doesn't shrink. The light only grows. Your mother's love for you won't fade. It will only shine brighter." Tears welled in Amina's eyes, but this time a faint smile appeared. You really think so? I know so, Jabbo answered with certainty. Not long after, news arrived from the maternity ward. Layla Ndiaye had delivered her baby safely. The newborn was healthy. Tears filled Yaya's eyes as she brought the news to Amina. It's a girl. Your mother is safe, and so is the baby. Amina's face lit up with tears of joy. That means I'm a sister now. Jabbo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Yes, Amina, and remember, your little sister will need you, just like your mother still needs you. For the first time in days, hope flickered in Amina's eyes. Days later, the police released their findings. Musa Okafor faced multiple serious charges: assault, threats, and sexual abuse. The 3 other men who had been with him agreed to testify against him in exchange for reduced sentences. The lead investigator told Jabbo, "With the evidence and witness testimonies, it's almost certain he'll spend many years in prison. We're also checking whether there are other victims." Jabbo finally breathed easier. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt Amina was truly safe. The police investigation soon reached the school. The principal, Ibrahim Diop, was questioned about why repeated warnings had been ignored. Teachers confirmed that signs of trouble had been visible for weeks. Fatima Adebayo, the concerned teacher, testified honestly. "I reported my worries about Amina multiple times. I told the administration she was absent often, exhausted in class, and clearly unwell, but my concerns were dismissed." The truth was undeniable. Negligence had nearly cost a young girl her life. The system that was meant to protect children had failed her. Jabbo, watching from the side, felt the weight of it all. He realized that when adults in positions of responsibility turn away, the smallest cry for help can be lost. At the hospital, Layla sat with her newborn in her arms, tears shining in her eyes. She looked at Jabbo and said, "You saved my daughter's life. I will never forget this." Yaya held his hand tightly. "You were our guardian angel." Jabbo lowered his head, humbled. "I only did what anyone should have done. I just couldn't look away." For the first time, Amina gave him a real smile. Not one of fear, but of gratitude. A few days later, Jabbo was back behind the wheel of the school bus. The familiar streets of Kibera, the laughter of children filling the air, everything looked the same. But inside, Jabbo knew something had changed. He had seen how a single look in the rearview mirror, a single question, a single moment of concern could alter the destiny of a child. As the golden rays of the afternoon sun streamed through the windows once more, he whispered to himself, "The most important thing we can do is never stay silent when someone needs help." The bus rolled forward, carrying its young passengers home, and in Jabbo's heart, the weight of the past days turned into a quiet promise that he would never again ignore the signs of a child in pain.